Day 24 of the Karen Read trial. I'm going to give you my daily recap. Today we have Detective Lieutenant Tully back on the stand. He is in the middle of his questioning by Adam Lally. And just a refresher, as the hierarchy of the Mass State Police goes, we have Michael Proctor, Sergeant Buchanan, and then Detective Lieutenant Tully above him. Adam Lally is questioning him about why they didn't go inside to the Albert home at 34 Fairview, and he says they didn't go in and ask for a search warrant because they didn't have probable cause. At that point, all the witnesses had said that he was invited over to the house, but he never came inside. He's also asked why they bring the vehicle to Canton PD. It essentially is his decision, and he decides not to bring it to Foxborough or to Milton because he needed a heated garage, he needed something that was large enough, and he wanted something that was secure. We began going over the surveillance footage from Temple Beth Abraham, I think it is, and the Canton Public Library. We have video footage of Karen Read's or a vehicle similar to Karen's driving past the temple on January 29th at 12:17 a.m. And this is down Washington Street. This is the camera angle that they have from the temple. That's her vehicle right there. This is the angle from the Canton Public Library. Her vehicle's not in this frame right here, but later on in the morning, you see a better angle of the snow that was accumulating around 5 a.m. So there is video footage of her driving away from John O'Keefe's house around 5:11 a.m. and then driving back at 5:15 a.m. So there's kind of a discrepancy of where she drives to before she goes over to the McCabe house. The next portion of questioning is extremely boring. It was so boring to me, but it was about the phone calls that Karen Read had made. This was a map that Detective Lieutenant Tully made. Here you can see some general areas that he's listed off in Canton. I almost fell asleep during this part. Lieutenant Tully says that there are 53 phone calls made from Karen Read's phone to John O'Keefe's phone at 12:33 a.m. up to 6:03 a.m. on the 29th of January. 53 phone calls? That's crazy. That sounds to me like she doesn't know where he is and she's frantic and she's trying to get a hold of him. The maps that Tully was showing basically were corroborating the evidence that they have about the cell phone towers and where Karen Read was traveling at those hours in the morning. Adam Lally asked if they did anything with the witness statement that they had about the Ford Edge in front of 34 Fairview. So this can be very damning testimony for the prosecution, but Lieutenant Tully has an answer for it. He says that they basically didn't think that this witness was credible. They changed their statement a few times. They were colorblind and they didn't have a good vantage point. They observed the vehicle from a distance. And we will hear from this person when the defense presents their case, because this is going to be the plow driver, and essentially this is the guy that Yannetti was talking to in the school parking lot the other day too. He says he doesn't know if anybody in the Albert family had a Ford Edge. They never investigated that. Still to this day, he doesn't say he knows that. And he says that Canton Police Department had the street blocked off after 4 a.m. until 6 a.m. so nobody could get in that area. So that's another reason they don't really know if this witness is credible. Getting into the cross-examination, it wasn't really as powerful from Alan Jackson as I was expecting it to be. He starts off asking why they never went into the Alberts residence, and Lieutenant Tully says they never wrote a search warrant for it and they didn't see the need to. Alan Jackson does ask about the Sally Port video because he wants to know the chain of custody with the evidence, and he says that he had seen the video. He thinks that it was delivered on a flash drive from the Canton chief to somebody in his office, but he's not sure. And he is asked about the process of collecting evidence like the plastic pieces, because he wrote the report for the CERT team evidence search at the home. Alan Jackson is trying to catch him in a little bit of a lie. I don't really think it stuck. And to be honest, if I was somebody who was on the fence today, I would be leaning more towards a guilty verdict for Karen. And I know that sounds crazy to say, but today really did change my perspective on a lot of things. Tully is dismissed before the lunch break, and then we get into the Needham police sergeant who just did the buccal swabs on Trooper Proctor and Buchanan. That was just basically to collect their DNA. He has no connection to them or the case other than that. And the rest of the witnesses are definitely a snoozer. There was no more cross-examination for any of these witnesses by Alan Jackson, Lally, just with the science and the terminology and all of the boringness. So it was painful. I can tell that Adam Lally is a really smart prosecutor, but he just has like a way about him that will put you to sleep. His questioning is so painfully boring, and it was painful. The next witness is Nicholas Bradford. He is a DNA analyst, and he's not with Mass Crime Lab. He's from a different lab somewhere. I think it was in Virginia. And he is going to be testing the hair on the back of the vehicle and the taillight. He's provided the DNA for John O'Keefe from Mass State Police. And he's also provided with Trooper Proctor and Buchanan's DNA as well. Bradford said that the test on the taillight showed strong support for inclusion of John O'Keefe's DNA and strong support for exclusion of Buchanan and Trooper Proctor, meaning that their DNA was not present most likely. The defense team didn't have any questioning, like I said, and then we got into the hair that was on the back of the vehicle that miraculously survived this blizzard, the tow truck ride, and everything else. Her name is Tess Chart. She's another DNA analyst, also with the same firm. She testified that the hair was consistent with John O'Keefe's DNA. That's all you really need to know. The next witness is Andre Porto, and he does work for Mass Crime Lab. He is a forensic scientist too, I believe, and he's going to be the one analyzing the hair from the taillight and some additional evidence. He tested a lot of the bloodstains that were found in different areas of John O'Keefe's clothing, etc., and we'll get into all of his findings. It was really interesting because we never get DNA from anybody else that's involved because no one else was considered a suspect in this. Even though people had the means and the motive to commit the crime, nobody else was ever determined to be a suspect. What happens is John O'Keefe's DNA is found on the front of his pants in a blood stain, but there are 2 additional male DNAs also found on the pants. He also says that on the taillight there was presence of John O'Keefe's DNA. To me, this really doesn't mean anything. If this analyst was on the stand, let's say day 12 potentially, before we saw like the Sally Port photos with the solo cups of the blood right next to the car, then I maybe would have believed it, but today on day 24 it just hits a little bit differently. In his fingernail clippings, it was only John O'Keefe's DNA, which is interesting because if there was a fight or a struggle, you would assume that there would be additional male DNA, and there wasn't. The other point of evidence was the shoe, and there were 5 contributors of DNA on the right inside, the inside of the right sneaker, which could really mean anything. He could have just been walking somewhere and got DNA, I'm guessing. He also tested the glass that was on the back bumper of Karen Reed's vehicle that had insufficient human DNA on it. The glass that was found at the crime scene had John O'Keefe's DNA, and a few other pieces of clothing. It sounded like there were at least 2 contributors to most things, which would mean John O'Keefe and 1 other person. That was the end of the day. There was no cross-examination, and Bev just let everybody go early. I think it was around like 3 something. She just said to go out and enjoy the beautiful weather. We're on time, which to me means that they didn't have another witness to call that was ready for that. But tomorrow, Friday, will be a full day of court. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Let me know what you guys think in the comments.